Hi and welcome back to my Android Jetpack tutorial. In this video, I'll be focusing on LiveData combined with data binding. Okay, so LiveData and data binding is part of Android Jetpack's architecture component. Okay, so let's get started. First step is to add the necessary dependencies. Let's go into documentation and copy this. Make sure it is the pre-Android X. If you haven't installed Android X, but if you have Android X, you can use this. I think you need to add some additional configurations. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm gonna use this, and let's go into our build.gradle file. And at the time of this recording, the version is 1.1.1. And let me close that and sync the build.gradle file. Okay, so I forgot to mention, if you want to combine data binding and live data, you need to enable data binding first with this line in your Android body inside your app level build.gradle file. Okay, so that was step 1, and step 2 is to create a ViewModel and LiveData object with your model class. Okay, so for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna create an app where when you press a button, the text on the text view will increment, which is a second step is to create a ViewModel. And in this ViewModel, I'm gonna create a LiveData variable, the mutable LiveData object, because it has two methods. First, the post method, and then second, the set method, which is useful later on. Okay, so let me import this, and we should pass a model class right here. Okay, so let me just create my model class. And make sure to specify that this is a variable. I'm gonna choose var because later on I will increment this int right here and pass in I'll pass in my model class. Okay, so that's for the variable, and I will create a method that will increment this trigger object right inside the ViewModel class. I need to go back and create a default value for this parameter and assign this trigger variable. Okay, and so I need to increment it first, count and then increment. Okay, so that's it for our ViewModel. And the third step is to set up the data binding and data variables directly into our XML file. Okay, so I have my layout right here. I need to wrap this with the layout element because we are using the data binding. And I'm gonna move this namespace, Android namespace. Okay, and I will declare a variable. And in the name is actually just an identifier. Okay, so I will pass in my ViewModel, and we need to specify the type of the ViewModel. Okay, so we are done creating the variable directly in the XML file, and now I will assign a text here directly from our ViewModel right here from this variable. I will concatenate this with a string because this will throw a resource not found exception because I am passing an int, and Android may think that this is a resource file. Okay, so I will pass a string so that it will not throw an exception, and I will say trigger count. And let's change this into single quotation. Okay, and in my button widget or view, I will directly set an on click, and remember the method that I created, the trigger method. I will trigger it here directly. I will assign it here directly inside. Okay, that's it for step 3. And step 4 is to set the content view using the data binding util. Okay, so we're done. Now I have my empty activity, and I need to set the content view. Set content view, and it's asking for a type. I'm gonna ignore that right now. Pass in the context. Okay, notice the naming convention of my layout file. It's activity.LiveData, and notice how data binding will generate a class for us. Okay, so it will be activity tot and LiveData binding. Okay, so it's not generating yet. Okay, so here's the generated class. It took like a minute to create, to be generated. It's activity.LiveData binding, and notice the naming convention. We have the underscore right here and underscore. So the activity is trying to do a generated naming convention, which is actually very impressive. Okay, so anyways, let's assign this data binding variable into this because it will return a type. Let me change this into var. Actually, I need to add late in it. Okay, so that was step 4, and step 5 is to create the ViewModel instance and assign that instance to the generated data binding object. Okay, so to get an instance of the ViewModel, I need to create a global variable first, and I'm going to call this ViewModel, and I'm going to call this ViewModel. We need to use ViewModel providers .of and pass in the owner of this lifecycle, which is this activity, and then get and pass in the class of our costume ViewModel. Okay, so remember the ViewModel variable that we set directly in our XML file? We need to assign it here and then pass in our newly created ViewModel. Okay, so that is step 5. That was step 5. And 6 is to set the Lifecycle Owner in order to update the UI changes automatically. Okay, so that was actually done, and now we only need one line in order to get this working, and we need to explicitly assign data binding that this is the lifecycle owner, which is weird because we already passed a this right here, and I actually have no idea why is that not working. Okay, so let me just do it anyways and then pass in this. Okay, so that's it. Let's try this app. There was an error, so let me just check the actually no, it was the wrong identifier. And okay, so let's try it again. Okay, now the app is installed. Let's go into the third item, which is the data binding plus LiveData and ViewModel. And let's try clicking the button, and it's working perfectly as we expected. Okay, so to summarize, first is we need to add the dependency. Second is to create a ViewModel and LiveData object with your model class, which is mine is trigger. And third is to set up the data binding and data variables directly into the XML file. Fourth is to set the content view using data binding util. And fifth is to create the ViewModel instance and assign that instance to the generated data binding object. And then last is to don't forget to set the lifecycle owner. Okay, so that's it for LiveData plus data binding, and there will be plenty more for Android Jetpack series.